The forest was silent before the sky broke open. Dark clouds moved like a heavy curtain, and then the air filled with fire. A ship, small and broken, tore through the clouds and fell like a wounded bird. The crash was violent. Trees snapped. Metal screamed and flames spread across the clearing. From the wreck, a man dragged himself out. His name was Daniel, a young human engineer. His uniform was torn, and blood marked his face. He coughed, tasting smoke. The air burned in his chest. But he was alive. He stumbled forward, one hand clutching his side, his eyes scanning the twisted wreck of his ship. Pieces of broken steel and shattered glass lay everywhere. The smell of burning fuel filled the air. And in the distance, thunder rolled. Daniel's mind spun. He had no memory of how the ship fell. Only flashes of alarms, red lights, and the violent impact. Alone, stranded, he thought. But then he froze. Someone was moving inside the wreck, at first. Daniel thought it was another human, but as the smoke cleared, he saw her. A figure stepped out slowly, tall, graceful, her skin a deep shade of green. Glowing faintly under the sunlight, her hair was silver white, falling in waves around her shoulders, her eyes sharp, unblinking, and strange. She was not human. She was alien. Daniel's heart raced. He backed away, reaching for the small tool at his belt like a weapon. The alien woman raised her hand slowly. No weapon in sight. Her movements calm, but watchful. They stared at each other across the wreck. Two survivors of the same fall, strangers in the same disaster. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crackle of fire and the groan of the broken ship. The alien woman spoke, her voice low and musical. But Daniel could not understand. The words were strange, sharp, and flowing. He shook his head. "I don't know what you're saying," he muttered, his voice rough from smoke. She tilted her head, studying him, then spoke again. Slower this time, but still foreign. Daniel felt fear and confusion, yet also curiosity. Behind them, the forest made a sound. A deep growl, low and dangerous. Both turned quickly. The trees shifted, and shadows moved among the ferns. Whatever lived here was watching them, circling them, waiting for weakness. Daniel and the alien looked at each other again, and this time there was something new in their eyes' understanding. They did not trust each other, but both knew they faced the same danger. Daniel pointed toward the forest edge. "We need to move," he said firmly, even if she could not understand the words. The alien woman narrowed her eyes, then gave a small nod. Together, they left the burning wreck behind, stepping carefully into the strange world that surrounded them. The forest was unlike anything Daniel had seen. Trees rose higher than towers, their bark black, their leaves glowing faint blue in the shadows. Strange vines curled like snakes, and insects with crystal wings buzzed softly in the air. The ground was damp, covered in moss that seemed to breathe. It felt alive, watching, listening. Daniel stumbled, his side aching. The alien moved closer, her hand reaching out as if to steady him, but he pulled back. Trust was still far away. Yet he noticed her eyes sharp, but not cruel. She too carried wounds, a cut across her shoulder, where blood, darker than human blood, stained her suit. They were both broken, both vulnerable. Time passed slowly as they moved, every sound in the forest keeping them tense. Suddenly, from the shadows, glowing eyes appeared, dozens of them, low to the ground, moving closer. Daniel's heart pounded. Predators. He looked at the alien woman, fear in his eyes, and she looked back. Then, without words, she pulled a small blade from her belt, its edge shining faintly with energy. Daniel gripped his broken tool tighter, ready to fight, though he knew it might not be enough. The creatures growled, stepping closer, their bodies long and lean, with scales that shimmered in the dim light for a moment. Daniel thought it was the end, but then the creatures stopped. As if sensing the fire still burning behind them, with a final growl, they turned back into the forest. Vanishing as quickly as they came, Daniel exhaled, shaking, sweat on his face. The alien woman lowered her blade slowly, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, without words, Daniel knew they would not survive alone. The forest was full of dangers, and the wreck was no safe place. Together, human and alien, they would have to find a way to live. Daniel looked once more at the smoke rising from the broken ship. There would be no going back. Not now. The real journey had just begun. The forest swallowed them as they left the crash behind. Smoke still rose in the distance, a reminder of what was lost. But ahead was only the unknown. Daniel walked carefully, his body aching, his breath sharp, every step heavier than the last. Beside him, the alien woman moved with quiet grace, her silver hair catching the light between the trees, her green skin glowing faintly against the shadows. They did not speak, not with words they could both understand. Every time Daniel tried, she tilted her head, listening. But her face showed confusion, and when she answered, her language sounded like wind through crystal. Beautiful but strange, still, small gestures worked. A nod, a glance, a raised hand to warn of danger. For now, it was enough. Hours passed. The forest thick and endless, strange calls echoed in the distance. Some sharp, some low, but all unfriendly. Daniel felt eyes on them, always watching from the dark. He wanted to ask her name, but the words stuck. Then, as if she could read his thought, the alien touched her chest lightly and spoke. "Lyra," she said. Slow and clear, Daniel blinked, then repeated it. "Lyra," she nodded once, satisfied, and pointed at him. He hesitated, then tapped his chest. "Daniel." Her lips curved, the faintest smile. For the first time since the crash, the silence between them did not feel heavy. But peace never lasted long in this place. A sudden rustle made Daniel tense from the undergrowth. A long insect-like creature crawled out, its shell black, its legs sharp like knives, its eyes burning red. It hissed, tail lifting like a spear. Daniel reached for a broken piece of metal he carried. Ready to strike, Lyra moved first, stepping in front of him, her blade flashing with a strange blue glow. The creature lunged, fast, but Lyra was faster. One strike, clean and fierce, and the beast collapsed. Its shell split, the ground shaking. From the weight, Daniel stared at her, shock mixing with awe. He had seen soldiers fight, but this was different, faster, sharper, almost like lightning given form. Lyra wiped her blade and turned to him. Her expression calm. Daniel gave a small nod. Thanks, though he knew she did not understand the word. Still, she seemed to know what he meant. Her silver eyes softer for a moment. The day faded into night. They found shelter inside a hollow tree, its trunk wider than a small house. Daniel gathered broken branches, trying to start a fire with a piece of sparking wire from his toolkit. It took long minutes, his hands trembling, but finally, the flames caught. Warm and bright, Lyra sat close, her eyes reflecting the firelight, her face thoughtful. She took a piece of bark and drew strange shapes with a sharp stone, symbols glowing faintly as if alive. Daniel leaned closer. Curious, she pointed to one shape. Then to herself. "Lyra," she repeated. Then she drew another mark and pointed at him. Daniel understood, so he took the stone, scratched his name and showed her. She studied the letters, then tried to copy them, her hand careful, her face serious. It was simple, but it was the first bridge between their worlds. As the fire crackled, the forest outside grew louder. Howls echoed in the distance, closer this time. Daniel's chest tightened, but Lyra raised a hand. Calm, listening. She whispered something soft. almost like a song, and the forest seemed to pause. Daniel did not know if it was magic or only her courage. But the night passed without attack. Exhaustion finally pulled him down. And for the first time since the crash, he slept. When morning came, the light was pale and silver. Daniel woke to find Lyra already awake, watching the forest with sharp eyes. Her wound from the crash looked worse, the cut across her shoulder deep and swollen. Daniel knelt beside her, frowning. He pulled out his small kit. Nothing more than bandages and weak medicine. She watched him closely, ready to resist. But then she saw his concern. Slowly, she allowed him to work. Daniel cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight. Lyra winced but did not pull away. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. Trust was building. Fragile but real. The journey continued, but the forest grew stranger. Trees twisted into shapes like bones, vines dripping with glowing liquid. Once, Daniel touched a leaf, and it burned his skin, leaving a red mark. Lyra pulled him back quickly. Shaking her head, she showed him a safe path. Her steps sure. Without her, Daniel knew he would already be dead. And yet, he also felt she needed him too. His tools, his mind, his knowledge of machines. Different strengths, bound by survival. By the end of the day, they reached a river, wide and dark. The water moved fast, too fast to swim. But Daniel saw broken logs nearby. He knelt, pulling wires and scraps from his bag. Lyra watched as he began tying the logs together. At first, her face showed doubt. But when the frame took shape, her eyes widened with respect. Together, they pushed the raft to the water for the first time. Daniel heard her laugh, soft and bright. The sound carried over the river like light in the dark. And so, step by step, moment by moment, the uneasy alliance grew stronger. Two strangers, two survivors, beginning to trust, but deep inside the forest, other eyes were watching. Waiting, the true danger had not yet shown itself. The raft drifted slowly down the river. Daniel sat at the front, eyes fixed on the dark water. Every ripple making his muscles tense. Lyra stood near the back, her silver hair catching faint sunlight, her blade always ready. The river looked endless, winding deeper into the unknown, its surface smooth but hiding secrets beneath. The forest on either side grew darker, thicker, the trees bending inward as if trying to block out the sky. Their trunks were black, twisted, their branches sharp like claws. Strange plants glowed faint green, casting an eerie light over the water. The silence was heavy, broken only by the splash of the raft against the current. It felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel tried not to show fear, but his heart pounded. Every sound made him jump, the distant screech of a bird, the snap of a branch in the distance. He glanced at Lyra, hoping to see calm. But even she looked tense. Her silver eyes scanned the shadows, her hand never leaving her weapon. That told Daniel everything he needed to know this part of the forest was dangerous. Suddenly, the raft jerked. Something heavy slammed against it from below. Daniel almost fell into the water, grabbing the side quickly. The current grew faster, pulling them deeper between the trees. Lyra shouted something in her own language, pointing at the river. Shapes moved under the water, long and dark, too. Fast to see clearly. Daniel's breath caught. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. The raft rocked again, harder, cracks forming in the tied logs. Then, a shadow rose from the water, a massive serpent-like creature. Its body covered in black scales, its eyes glowing red. The beast lunged, mouth wide with rows of teeth. Lyra struck first, her blade slashing across its face, sparks flying. Where the blade met scale, the creature roared, the sound shaking the trees. Daniel grabbed a broken metal rod, stabbing at the beast's body. It thrashed, water exploding around them, nearly tearing the raft apart. Finally, with one last strike, Lyra drove her blade deep into its eye. The serpent screamed, twisting, then sank back into the river, leaving the water dark and still once more. Breathing hard, Daniel collapsed against the raft. Lyra crouched beside him, her chest rising fast, blood dripping from a cut on her arm. They looked at each other, both shaken, but alive. Daniel let out a shaky laugh. "Guess we're not welcome here," he said quietly. Lyra didn't understand the words, but the way he smiled made her lips curve faintly. The river carried them further until the current slowed. Finally, they reached land and pulled the raft to shore. The forest here was darker than before, the air colder, mist hung low to the ground, curling around their feet. Every tree looked the same, tall and black, no sunlight breaking through. Daniel shivered. "It feels wrong here," he whispered. Lyra's expression was grim. She touched the ground with her hand, murmuring something like a warning. As they walked, the shadows grew longer, even though no sun shone through the canopy. Whispers seemed to float through the mist. Soft but near, Daniel stopped, listening hard, his skin crawling. "Do you hear that?" he asked, though he knew she wouldn't understand. But Lyra heard it too, her hand tightening on her blade, her silver eyes flashing. The whispers grew louder, turning into faint voices. Daniel spun, but no one was there. Only trees, only shadows. A chill ran down his spine, memories from Earth mixing with the sounds. Voices of people he once knew, calling his name. He shook his head, whispering, "No, you're not real." Lyra reached for him, gripping his arm tightly. Pulling him forward, her touch broke the illusion, the whispers fading into silence. Daniel realized the forest was not just alive, it was trying to get inside their minds. They pressed on, each step harder than the last. Once a tree bent as if moving, its roots stretching across the path, forcing them to climb over. Once shadows moved against the mist, shaped like people, then gone. Daniel's fear grew heavier. But Lyra stayed strong, guiding him with steady steps. It was clear she knew this kind of danger, maybe had faced it before. Hours passed until they reached a clearing. At the center stood massive stone pillars, broken and covered in strange glowing symbols, ruins, ancient and powerful. Lyra froze, her eyes widening. She whispered something, voice trembling, not with fear, but with recognition. Daniel looked at her. "You know this place?" She didn't answer, but her hands shook as she touched one of the glowing marks. The stone lit up brighter at her touch, pulsing like a heartbeat. The forest around them went silent, completely silent. Daniel stepped back, uneasy. The ruins seemed alive. Watching them, Lyra turned to him, her face pale, her voice low as she spoke in broken words he could finally understand. "Old home," she said, pointing at the glowing stone. "Danger." Daniel's chest tightened, his fear mixing with curiosity. What kind of home was this? And what kind of danger slept here? The forest of shadows had brought them to something far older, far darker than beasts or rivers. Something that was waiting. Something that was waking. The ruins stood silent, ancient stone rising like broken teeth from the earth. Each pillar was carved with glowing marks, symbols that pulsed faintly as if alive. Daniel stared at them, unease twisting in his chest. The place felt heavy, like a graveyard that still breathed. Lyra stepped forward slowly, her silver hair brushing her shoulders, her green skin catching the faint glow of the symbols. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with recognition. She touched one of the carvings, and the stone answered with light, spreading across the surface like veins. Daniel froze. "What did you just do?" he whispered. Lyra didn't answer, her lips moving in soft words he could not understand. The forest around them was silent. The mist had stopped, The shadows no longer moved. It was as if the world itself was waiting, holding its breath. Daniel's hand tightened on the broken metal rod he carried, his only weapon. He hated the feeling of standing in the middle of something far older, far stranger than him, yet he couldn't look away. Lyra's voice grew stronger, her hand pressed flat against the stone. The glowing symbols lit up brighter, wrapping the ruins in a pale blue light. Suddenly, the ground shook, dust falling from the pillars. A section of the ruins shifted, stone sliding apart, revealing a dark passage leading underground. Daniel's heart jumped. No, 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 don't tell me we're going down there. Lyra looked at him, her eyes firm. She pointed to the passage, then to herself, then to him. It was clear. She wanted them both to go inside. Daniel groaned. Running a hand through his dirty hair, every part of him screamed to stay out. But something in Lyra's gaze kept him from refusing. Fine, he muttered, but if we die, I'm blaming you. Lyra didn't understand the words, but the way he followed her made her lips twitch into the faintest smile. The passage was narrow. Carved from black stone, symbols glowed faintly. On the walls, lighting the way with an otherworldly blue, the air was cold. Carrying the smell of dust and something older, each step echoed. And Daniel felt the weight of the ruins pressing in around them as they moved deeper. Daniel noticed broken machines scattered on the floor. Rusty metal, strange devices with wires like vines, all abandoned, some still hummed faintly. Alive after who knew how many years, he knelt, running his fingers over one device. The design was alien. Yet parts of it felt almost familiar. He could see patterns of circuits, structures that hinted at advanced engineering. Maybe I can use this, he whispered. Lyra crouched beside him, nodding, her eyes shining with recognition. It seemed her people had built this long ago, but the purpose was still hidden. The passage opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling rose high, cracked in places, letting in faint streams of light from the forest above. At the center stood a massive stone altar covered in glowing carvings. Around it, broken statues lay scattered. Tall figures with long arms and faces hidden behind masks. Daniel swallowed hard. This doesn't look friendly. Lyra approached the altar carefully, her hand brushing over the glowing symbols. Her lips moved, speaking in her strange tongue, the words soft and filled with weight. Then the ground trembled again. From the altar, a low hum filled the air, growing louder. Vibrating through their bones, Daniel stepped back, eyes wide. Lyra, stop. Oh, whatever you're doing, just stop. But Lyra's eyes glowed faintly. Her body tense, as if the altar was speaking to her. Calling to her, Daniel shouted again. But before he could reach her, the altar flared with light. The chamber filled with energy, walls pulsing like veins. Images flashed across the stone, visions of ships flying through the stars. Battles raging in fire, worlds burning. Daniel staggered, shielding his eyes. Lyra gasped, falling to her knees, her hands clutching her head. Daniel ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. Lyra, hey, stay with me. Her body shook, her voice breaking as she spoke words in broken English. War. Lost. Danger. Daniel's chest tightened, his blood cold. She had learned enough of his language to warn him. This place was not just ruins, it was a warning. Something terrible had happened here. And maybe it was happening again, suddenly. A new sound filled the chamber. Not the hum of stone, but the growl of something alive. From the shadows at the edge of the chamber, shapes moved, eyes glowed red. Bodies long and thin, crawling along the walls like spiders. Daniel grabbed his rod, standing in front of Lyra, his heart hammering. The creatures hissed, claws scraping. The stone surrounding them, Daniel whispered. Of course. It couldn't just be ruins. There had to be monsters too. Lyra rose, weak but determined, her blade glowing faintly with energy. Daniel stood beside her, his voice low. "All right, looks like it's you and me again." The creatures circled, the hum of the ruins still vibrating through the chamber. In that moment, Daniel realized this place was more than history. It was alive, it was dangerous, and it was pulling them deeper into its secrets. The hidden ruins had opened, but what they had found inside might be worse than the forest above. And now, with creatures closing in, escape was no longer simple. The choice was clear: fight together or die alone. The ruins shook with every hiss of the creatures. Daniel gripped his broken metal rod tight, his knuckles white. Lyra stood beside him, her glowing blade raised, her silver eyes sharp despite the pain in her shoulder. The chamber was alive with danger, shadows crawling across the walls, claws scraping stone. The first creature leaped. A blur of teeth and claws. Daniel swung wildly, the rod connecting with a sharp crack. The beast fell, but another replaced it. Lyra moved like lightning, her blade slicing through two more, blue sparks lighting the dark. They fought back to back, human and alien, surrounded but unbroken. The ruins themselves seemed to pulse with their struggle, the glowing carvings burning brighter. At last, the creatures retreated, hissing into the shadows, their red eyes fading. Daniel bent over, gasping for breath, sweat dripping down his face. Lyra dropped to one knee, her blade still in hand, her body trembling. Daniel crouched beside her. "Hey, stay with me. We're not done yet." Her silver eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, Daniel saw something deeper, not just strength, but trust. They left the chamber, the ruins humming quietly behind them. Outside, the sky had turned dark, clouds rolling heavy above the forest. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of rain. Daniel muttered, "A storm, just what we need." Lyra glanced upward, her expression grim. She seemed to understand the danger. The forest around them whispered with the coming wind, leaves shaking, branches groaning. Rain fell suddenly, hard and cold. It soaked their clothes in seconds, turning the ground to mud. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the trees. Daniel stumbled, his vision blurred by the downpour. They needed shelter, fast. Lyra grabbed his arm and pointed through the storm. A hollow cliff rose, dark but solid. They ran, slipping through mud and roots until they collapsed inside. The cave was shallow but dry, the storm raging outside like a beast tearing at the world. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, his side aching from old wounds. Lyra knelt across from him, her green skin shining with water, her silver hair plastered to her face. The storm outside roared, but inside the cave, silence settled heavy. Daniel pulled out his small kit, his hand shaking as he opened it. He pointed at Lyra's shoulder, the wound from earlier, now worse. Swollen and bleeding, she shook her head, trying to wave him off, but Daniel snapped, "Don't be stubborn. Let me help." Lyra blinked, not knowing the words, but the tone was enough. Slowly, she let him approach. Daniel cleaned the wound as best as he could, using cloth and weak antiseptic. Lyra winced, her teeth clenched, but she didn't pull away. When he finished wrapping the bandage tight, their eyes met for a long moment. Neither looked away. The storm outside forgotten, Daniel whispered, almost to himself. "You're not the enemy, are you?" Lyra tilted her head, not understanding the words, but sensing the meaning. She raised her hand and placed it gently on his chest, then spoke his name. "Daniel." The sound of it in her voice was soft, almost human. For the first time, Daniel smiled, but peace lasted only seconds. A growl echoed from the cave's entrance, low and deep. Daniel turned sharply, his heart dropping. Two of the predator beasts from the forest stood in the rain, their eyes glowing, teeth bared. The storm had driven them to hunt, and the cave was their trap. Daniel grabbed his rod. Stepping in front of Lyra, she rose, weak but ready, her blade trembling in her hand. The beasts moved closer, slow and confident. Lightning lit their bodies long, lean, covered in scales that shimmered with rain. Daniel's voice was low, steady. We hold them here. Together, the first beast lunged. Daniel swung, the rod cracking against its jaw. It roared, snapping back at him, claws tearing through. His sleeve, blood running down his arm. Lyra struck from the side, her blade cutting deep into its leg. The creature shrieked, stumbling. But the second beast attacked, pinning Daniel to the ground. Its teeth snapped inches from his throat. Daniel struggled, his strength fading, his vision blurring. Then, suddenly, the weight vanished. Lyra had thrown herself onto the beast. Driving her blade through its skull, it collapsed, twitching, dead. Daniel gasped, rolling free. His chest heaving, the first beast limped back, snarling. But it saw its fallen kin and retreated into the storm. Silence filled the cave again, broken only by thunder and rain. Daniel looked at Lyra, blood on her hands, her blade dark, her chest rising fast. He whispered, "You saved me." Lyra leaned against the wall, her silver eyes soft despite the exhaustion. She reached out, brushing his shoulder gently, then whispered his name again. Daniel understood the unspoken message. Trust had been tested, and now it was real. The storm raged through the night. But inside the cave, something stronger had been built. They were no longer just survivors forced together. They were partners, bound by blood, by battle, by choice. The storm had tried to break them, but instead, it had forged them into something new. The storm ended with the first light of morning. The forest was wet and heavy with mist, the air filled with the smell of rain and broken branches. Daniel stepped out of the cave, his arm bandaged clumsily, his body aching but alive, behind him. Lyra walked slowly, her steps steady despite the wound on her shoulder, her blade still in hand. They had survived the night, but survival was no longer enough. Daniel looked at the sky, gray and endless. Somewhere out there, a rescue might still be possible, but time was slipping away. The forest wanted them dead, and sooner or later, it would succeed. He opened his pack, spreading out scraps of metal, wires, and broken devices he had collected since the crash. Among them was the transmitter core from the wreck. Cracked but not destroyed, Daniel's eyes narrowed with determination. "If I can fix this, someone might hear us," he muttered. Lyra crouched beside him, watching as his hands worked with careful skill. She did not understand the machines, but she understood the look in his eyes. Hope. Hours passed as Daniel bent over the device. He used alien metal from the ruins, wires from his toolkit, even pieces of his own gear. His fingers bled, his head throbbed, but he kept working. Lyra stayed close, standing guard at the cave's mouth, her sharp eyes scanning the forest. Every now and then, she brought him leaves or herbs, pointing at them with meaning, food, medicine, energy. Daniel gave small nods of thanks, never stopping his work. At last, sparks danced across the transmitter. A faint hum filled the air. Weak but alive, Daniel leaned closer, his voice trembling. "Come on, come on." The machine lit faintly, a small pulse flashing every few seconds. He sat back, exhausted but smiling. "It's not much, but it's something, a signal." Lyra tilted her head, listening to the faint hum, then touched his hand lightly. For the first time, Daniel believed. They had a chance, but the forest was not finished with them. That night, the predators returned, not 2 or 3, but many. Their eyes glowed red in the dark, their growls echoing from every side. Daniel froze, his heart racing. Lyra gripped his arm, pulling him close, her whisper urgent in broken words. "Danger." Many, The cave trembled with the sound of claws scratching stone. They were surrounded. Daniel's mind raced. He looked at the transmitter, still pulsing weakly. It could bring help, but not fast enough. They had to survive until rescue came. He tightened his grip on his rod. "We fight," he said. Lyra's eyes locked with his, sharp and steady. She gave a single nod. Fight. The first wave of creatures stormed the cave. Daniel swung wildly, his rod breaking teeth, his arms screaming with pain. Lyra moved like fire, her blade cutting through bodies, her voice shouting in fierce cries. Blood sprayed the walls, the ground slick with claws and scales. But more came, endless red eyes glowing in the storm of shadows. Daniel's chest burned, his vision blurred. One beast pinned him to the ground, its teeth inches from his throat. He screamed, pushing with all his strength, but it was not enough. Then Lyra leaped across him, driving her blade through the beast's chest. She fell with it, her body crashing hard against the stone. Daniel scrambled to her side, panic flooding. She was bleeding, her breath shallow, her silver eyes dim. "Stay with me. Lyra, please," he begged, his hands shaking. She reached up, touching his face weakly, her voice breaking. "Live. Daniel. Live." His throat tightened, anger replacing fear. He stood, roaring, swinging his rod with every ounce of strength. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. The creatures hesitated, their red eyes narrowing, one by one. They pulled back, fading into the forest, leaving silence behind. Daniel collapsed beside Lyra, tears mixing with rain. He pressed his hands to her wound, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me. Not now." The transmitter pulsed faintly in the corner. A promise of help, but help too far away. Lyra's eyes flickered open, faint but alive. Daniel breathed out in relief. "We'll make it, both of us. I swear." Hours passed, the forest quiet at last. Daniel kept her close, whispering promises she did not fully understand, but could feel. The transmitter continued to hum, sending its weak signal into the stars. Maybe someone was listening, maybe not. But Daniel knew one truth: he would not abandon her. Not now, not ever. The night was long, but they endured it together. And when the first light of dawn touched the cave, Daniel looked at Lyra and saw not just an alien, not just a stranger, but a partner, a friend. Maybe something more. The final choice was made, not in words, but in actions. They would fight together. They would survive together, until rescue came, more, until the end. The weak hum of the transmitter filled the cave, steady and slow like a heartbeat. Daniel sat beside Lyra, his arm around her shoulders, watching the device with desperate eyes. Each pulse was a promise, a call for help sent into the endless sky. But time dragged, and the forest outside whispered with danger. Lyra's breathing was shallow, her wound wrapped in blood-stained cloth. Daniel had done everything he could, but it wasn't enough. He clenched his fists, anger burning in his chest. "Someone has to hear this," he muttered. Lyra opened her silver eyes, weak but still shining. Her hand touched his arm gently, her lips moving around one broken word. "Hope." Daniel froze, then nodded. "Hope." He repeated, his voice low but firm. The day passed, then night returned. Predators circled in the distance, but they did not attack. The forest itself seemed to wait, silent, heavy, as if it knew something was coming. Daniel refused to leave the transmitter's side, feeding it every scrap of power he could find. His body ached, his mind spun with exhaustion. But his heart would not give up, and then it happened. The faint hum of the device grew stronger, the pulse brighter. A crackle of sound burst from the machine, sharp and real. Daniel's eyes widened. He grabbed the device, his voice breaking. This is engineer Daniel Carter, stranded on unknown planet. Please respond for a long moment. Only static, then a voice. Faint but clear. Signal. Received coordinates locked. Rescue inbound. Daniel laughed. A sound of relief and disbelief, tears burning his eyes. He turned to Lyra, shaking her gently. They heard us. We're getting out. She looked at him, confused but understanding his joy, her lips curving into the faintest smile. But rescue? Would take time, hours maybe, and the forest had heard the signal too. That night, the predators returned, more than before, their red eyes glowing like fire. They were not waiting this time, they were hunting. Determined to end it before help arrived, Daniel stood at the cave entrance, his rod in hand, his body trembling but ready. Lyra struggled to her feet, her blade still glowing faintly despite her weakness. He tried to push her back. No, you need to rest, but she shook her head fiercely, her voice steady. Fight. Together, Daniel's chest tightened. Then he nodded. Together, the creatures charged. Shadows spilling into the cave like a flood. Daniel swung, the rod cracking against skulls, his arms screaming with pain. Lyra struck with fierce grace. Each slash of her blade lighting the dark, the cave filled with roars and screams. Blood splashing across stone, they fought like one, human and alien, side by side, unbroken. But there were too many. Daniel was thrown back, his body slamming into the wall, his vision spinning. A beast lunged for him, teeth flashing, but Lyra leaped, her blade driving deep into its chest. The creature collapsed, but she fell too, her strength fading. Daniel crawled to her, pulling her close. Stay with me. Don't you dare leave me now. She smiled faintly, her hand weak on his chest. Live, she whispered again. The ground shook. A roar filled the sky. Daniel looked up, his heart leaping. Through the storm clouds, a massive ship descended. Engines burning bright. The rescue had arrived. The predators hissed, retreating into the shadows as the ship's lights cut through the forest. Daniel shouted, waving his arms. Here, we're here. A hatch opened. Beams of light pouring down. Ropes dropped. Figures in armored suits rushing toward them. Strong hands pulled Daniel to his feet. Others lifted Lyra carefully. Daniel staggered, looking back at the forest one last time. The black trees, the glowing mist, the ruins hidden deep inside. This world had tried to kill him, but it had also given him something he never expected. An ally, a friend, maybe something more. Inside the ship, medics worked on Lyra. Daniel sat beside her, refusing to move. One of the rescuers looked at him. Confused, you brought back an alien. Daniel's eyes burned as he answered, I brought back my partner. The ship rose into the sky, leaving the cursed forest. Behind, Daniel took Lyra's hand gently, her silver eyes opening just enough to meet his, for the first time since the crash. He felt peace, not because the danger was gone, but because they had faced it together, and so the story ended not with escape alone, but with the beginning of something greater, a bond between human and alien, forged in fire, storm, and blood. A promise that survival was not just possible, but shared. Together, they looked out at the stars. No longer strangers, but survivors, partners, and something far more.